statement, how long is the Section 8, waiting list? Is there a waiting for that, and how long is that?
Well, every city is going to be different. Can you guys hear me?
Gotcha.
Yes.
Every city will be different. Culver City, as an example, our waiting list, well, let me just back up a little bit. When I started here back in the early 2000s, they had a wait list of about 8,000 people. It took us until 2016 to exhaust that list of 8,000 people. So currently we have about 10,000 people on our waiting list, and the standard letter that we send out, it says average, a minimum of 5 to 7 years. In reality, for us, it's probably more like 10 to 12 years on the waiting list. But once we start calling, once we begin to call from the wait list, it goes by faster, because a lot of people who are actually on the waiting list were never qualified when they applied. They were probably over income. But HUD says that we cannot determine if they're eligible or not until we actually pull their name off the wait list and then collect all the information to determine if they're eligible. So to answer your question, it varies. It depends on the housing authority. It depends on how many people are actually on the waiting list. But we're saying average 7 to 10 years, average for us.
Okay, and then for HACLA, for Housing Authority, City of LA, is it 8 to 10 years as well?
Well, I'll say this. We had opened our waiting list back in 1998 for about a month. And I guess it was 1998 for a period of time. And then we closed it, we lotterized it, and had about 150,000 folks who applied. We had assisted those folks, and we stopped assisting them around 2004. We had kind of closed the waiting list. The thing about it is that we finished, I will say, assisting those folks on the waiting list. Many times we will have to reopen again. So what we did was we reopened the waiting list in 2017 for 1 month. And the differences between the time that we were assisting families, which was back in 98 all the way through 2004, when we closed the waiting list, we were still assisting those people, many of those folks on the waiting list, up until 2000 and I'll say maybe 16. So those people were still waiting that long to get assisted. Now,
right.
Fast forward, now we just recently opened in 2017 for 1 month, and we lotterized those folks, and those folks started getting a call for an interview the following year. February, we had to start scheduling interviews. So as you can see, the differences in terms of what we did then and what we do now, many families were not expecting to get those calls as quite quickly as they did. So it can vary, but I just wanted to give you an idea of how that could be. But excuse me, for most folks, the wait is some years. There's many years people wait on the waiting list because there's not enough money to assist everyone.
Now, if they have a voucher, the tenant that is there anything else that they need in order to move forward and being approved to rent the unit?
Well, once they've gotten that voucher, they've gone through all the steps. They've gone through the eligibility. They're determined to be eligibility. They've gone through the criminal background check. They've completed the full application. So once they have that voucher, they're literally ready to lease up. They just need an owner to say yes. And the inspection to be done, of course.
How much over that, if let's say in the city of LA, how much over that 2,600 that was there can I charge the tenant?
Yes, the families initially when they lease up, they usually can pay between 30 and 40% of their income toward the rent, and no more than that. So if you as an owner is asking for, I'll say maybe $3,000 for your 3-bedroom unit. If that's way over the voucher payment standard, maybe about what, $360, $80. So that unit may not be affordable for your family. So the family would be able to rent your unit. It may not be affordable for them, and what means is that you as an owner will make a decision whether you want to lower the rent so the family can be able to afford the rent, or you would look for another unit that's not Section 8 because you're not going to be able to do that as well. The other thing is that the family, once they are on the program, however, their rent can go as high as the market. So once that family initially leases up, and perhaps maybe they leased up at the payment standard because that's what your rents are, it was affordable for them, they're on the program. So as I was saying, once the family is on the program, and then after you've been getting increases as an owner, their rent can go as high as the market. So it can exceed the payment standards. So there may be some families on our program who rents have exceeded the payment standards because they are in the unit, your owner has been able to get the increases, and the rent support the increase in the rental market in terms of the rent reasonableness test that the housing authority performs on rental units.
Another way to look at this, to answer your question, email, is that, what can the tenant pay over? So one of the things that we follow is HUD's rule. It's called a 40% rule. What that means is that when the tenant first gets on the program, their portion, the portion they pay, cannot exceed 40%. Most tenants pay 20, 30, just as Serena said, but it cannot exceed 40%. So as an example, I leased up someone last year, and once I did the calculation, the computer system wouldn't even let me go further because it said the tenant's portion is 45%. So I had to go back to the owner to get the owner to lower that a little bit. It was probably $60, $70, to bring it below that 40% so that the tenant could lease it. So to answer your question, the tenant cannot pay more than what they're eligible to pay based upon our calculations. So going back to the $3,164 for a 3-bedroom, if the tenant has a great job and based upon their income, they can afford to lease up at that rent, fine. But if they can't, the owner can't say, well, I'll take the $2,900 that you guys are going to give me, and then I'll just, between me and the tenant, get the other couple $100 on the side. You can't do that on the program. That's a violation of the program. So,
Okay.
If it's found out, it could jeopardize the tenant's housing and their voucher, so we want to not do that.
Got it. So no side bets or no
side. Yeah,
collected.
exactly.
Okay. All right. Gotcha.
I do want to add, there's no side leases either.
Correct.
The lease that is submitted to the housing authority is the lease that the housing authority is using, and that's the lease the tenant is obligated under the program.
Gotcha.
And there's also a fail-safe message, fail-safe way. If the owner says, I want $3,500, we just cannot enter into a contract with that owner. So we will not enter into a contract with the owner unless the amount is correct, unless it's affordable.
How much and how often can I raise the rent on my Section 8 tenant?
Well, in Culver City, it's once a year, and there is no percent. You can't. In other words, we don't say you can only ask for 3%, and not in Culver City.
Okay.
If the tenant can afford it, they can. If the tenant can't, we will then ask the tenant, well, the owner is asking for 5% rent increase. This is what your portion is going to be. Would you like to stay in the unit and swing it, or would you like to take your voucher and move? We give that tenant that option.
So that's based on kind of like the rent control for that particular city. Is that
correct?
Okay. All right. Got it. So on that note, when you say how often we can raise the rent, we can do it once a year. We can do it
once a year, and that's at the tenant's anniversary. And just to let the audience know, for Section 8, the state law says that owners have to give Section 8 participants, or subsidized participants is what it says, 90 days notice of any change in terms of tenancy. So you would have to serve that tenant and the housing authority consecutively with a 90-day notice. We need to know, and the tenant needs to know at the same time.
What if it's a 2-bedroom? I'm sure this is another hot topic. So it's a 2-bedroom that's on title, but a den has been converted to a bedroom. How's that handled with Section 8, Teresa?
Well, what HUD says is the room has to have a window. Well, from what our last training was, a window, the outlets, and what have you. You can't go through one room to get to another room. And as long as the owner or the tenant puts a closet in that room, that can be a bedroom, but it also has to meet a certain size. I don't have the parameters with me, but it has to be a certain size in order to be considered a bedroom. So our inspectors, when they go out to inspect a unit, they will make that determination whether they believe that actually can be considered a bedroom. But it does have to have egress. It does have to have egress, window to get out in case something happens, and the closet.
So it's going to be based mainly on the inspection.
Yes, and the size of the room.
In regard to Section 8 and trying to like determine how long I can lease the property to someone on Section 8, is there a minimum of like 6 months, a year, 2 years? Like what's the minimum that I could contract a Section 8 tenant?
Okay, well, you sign a lease with the tenant. Initially, when the tenant leases up in your unit, you sign a lease with the tenant for 1 year, and you sign a contract with the housing authority for 1 year. And after this, month to month, if you are trying to terminate the tenancy of that tenant, like for example, you says, I don't want Section 8 anymore, I want to get rid of this tenant. And if you're trying to get rid of the tenant for them violating their lease, that's one thing, because you go through the legal process to do that, and you can serve your notices to the tenant. Of course, you send a copy of that to the housing authority. But if it's termination for no cause and there's no fault of the tenant, then you need to terminate that tenancy the legal way, which means you need to go through the legal process. If it's under RSO, our rent stabilization ordinance has the legal grounds for termination, and you will have to follow those guidelines. And then if that is the case, you decide to do that, then you need to give the Section 8 tenant a 90-day notice, and of course send that to the housing authority.
Now, Culver City just started rent control. As a matter of fact, it's almost a year now, and they're going back to the city council to see if they want to make that permanent. But our rules are, we slightly follow LA's. For the most part, we follow LA's. However, it's slightly different in the fact that if a tenant has been living in that property for at least 10 years, and if that tenant is elderly or disabled, you can't get rid of the tenant at all. They become a permanent tenant according to Culver City's new rent ordinance, rent control ordinance. It's odd, I know, and I'm sure it's going to be questioned and fought here and there, because it was just kind of happened, and they're kind of still writing it. I think it's a work in progress. But other than if there's some illegal reason you want to get rid of the tenant, again, you'd have to go through the court process. But if it's no fault, you have to pay the tenants 3 months rent plus $1,000 relocation assistance. And again, that you have to have a reason.
If the tenant is on Section 8 and they're not able to make their portion of the payment, can the landlord move forward with eviction if they're just getting the partial payment from Section 8, but not the Section 8 tenant's portion?
Well, that's a two-part question, because right now during COVID, nobody can evict tenants at all under this COVID thing. And tenants will have, I believe if I heard Mayor Garcetti right, up to 12 months or 18 months to pay any back rent. I believe he said that his staff is talking to the courts where they're going to stop evictions for 12 months after. So yeah, right now that's not a reason to evict the tenant at all.
I would like to add something to Teresa as well. The great thing of an owner having the Section 8, because for those families who are being affected because of COVID situation where they can't afford their rent, they lost their job, or hours being cut, the housing authority, they report that to the housing authority, and we can reevaluate their rent payment. And they will provide the proof that they have a decrease in their income. We will reevaluate their rent and determine whether or not that shortage that they have will impact their rent. And if it does, we may end up paying more of the rent burden and the family pays less. So that keeps your family in your unit and keeps you not missing those cash flows that's coming in on a monthly basis. So that's one of the great things. If you were a person who didn't have Section 8 and you lost your job, you as an owner or investor would be having challenges trying to collect your rents from that tenant because they don't have any other resources out there.
Absolutely.
And Serena brings up a good point. That's why it's important that the tenant, if the tenant is on Section 8, that they stay in communication with their caseworker. Because if they're not, and for some reason they're struggling and we don't know about it, there's nothing we can do. But then again, if someone calls me and say, hey, I can't pay my rent, and we say, well, provide me with your source of income, or your income, not source of your income, and I do a calculation based upon their income, and based upon their income, they can pay what they're supposed to pay. They're just not because they didn't manage their money well. That's a whole other story. But if they can't pay due to COVID, loss of job, reduction in hours, or their kids aren't in school, and as a result, they can't work because they're home taking care of their kids, or they can't find a babysitter. There's a lot of reasons. Then we will evaluate that. So to answer that question is, it determines on why the tenant can't pay.
So it's
the rent.
possible, it's possible that the Section 8 could be more and make up that difference. If
We will. We actually
Yeah.
will. HUD giving us more money. As a matter of fact, I have several families on the Section 8 program who the whole family's lost their jobs. Husband, wife, and the 2 kids lost their jobs. We are paying all of the rent. Now, Culver City has a $50 minimum rent. So no matter what, if the tenant makes zero income, they have to come up with $50. You know, and we're going to decide whether to lower that to 25 or even zero. But right now, we're paying all but $50 of their rent. And so that's the beauty of having, if you currently have a Section 8 participant now and they're not working or they have a loss of income or reduction in income, we're going to cover that. So it's an advantage right now to have Section 8 if you currently have a Section 8 tenant. So for those who are asking questions that my tenant isn't paying their portion, that tenant needs to contact their caseworker, and they can do that by email or by phone. We're still, you know, even though we're working remotely, we're still working. And then so that we can make that adjustment for them, because you know we don't want the owner to not get their money.
like as an owner, does the property need to be in an LLC, a corporation? Can it just be in Emil Belvin's name, or how does title need to be held? Does that matter?
Not with us. We basically look at the grant deed or the closing escrow statement. That's the name we take. And then, then of course the owner would have to be, you know, the owner will complete a W-9 form for tax purposes, and you put whatever you need to put on your W-9 form for purposes of payment.
Got it. And for the city of LA, is that the same as well, Serena?
With our inspectors are not going out to the units because of COVID-19. So we are having our owners self-certify many of the initial inspections and any type of 24-hour emergency inspections and any other deficiencies that are there. The tenant and the owner will certify and say these things have been met when it comes to some type of deficiency that the tenant may be complaining about with the unit. We're doing this all through July the 31st of this year, and pretty much after that, we're going to probably come back out. We're going to come out to make sure what you said, that your unit was good to go, and make sure that your unit is okay, decent, safe, and sanitary. So we're going to be rolling that out hopefully sometime after the July the 31st, all the way up through probably October 31st is probably the time that this will be going on. And if, depending on COVID situation, if the administrators decide to extend that, they will do so at this time. But as far as anything, as far as a requirement for you as an owner to have your property titled, that's your own property. And that's one thing to remember. This is your property. It's not the housing authority's property. I would love to have a commission from it, but you know, I wasn't there. So
I will.
They collect the rents, but this is your property. So basically, however you title it, it's fine with us. The only thing that our responsibility is to make sure and verify you are the owner of the property. So like Teresa said, we may request the grant deed from the owner of the property, the W-9 for those who are whoever files taxes on this property. And usually we do our W-9 with the owner and the payee, because sometimes we have owners, the payee and the owner are two different people. So we have property management companies that may have payment groups and things like that. So it's how you want to structure your ownership. That's up to you. We just ask to verify the documents. So when it comes to maybe an estate, maybe you have your property in a trust, we may ask for the trust documents, the LLC documents, the articles of incorporation, whatever document is needed. The owner services office will ask you if there was some things provided that needed more. So that's pretty much it though. You could be a regular owner and just have a grant deed. We're good to go.